into another episode of the Young Terps podcast. This is your host, Mason Viner, joined once again by Ahmed Gafir. Ahmed, Terps rolling in camp. Time to talk about some offense, but first, I think we want to touch on what we're doing here on the podcast, what content we're going to have coming for you guys that follow us here on the Young Terps pod this season.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely excited to take the show into the 2023 season. We'll do probably a midweek show, whatnot, where we kind of preview the opponent and talk about the game or whatnot, and then look to do something post game to just do quick analysis to give our takes on the game, just kind of through the season as Mike Loxley works to take the team into another bowl game in year 3. So yeah, definitely should be good. Definitely looking forward to keeping this going through the 23 season.
Yeah, I mean, definitely got some cool stuff. We're going to try post game this year. Got a couple of night games. We have some opportunities to, maybe release some content either before the game and immediately after. So check out all that stuff. Obviously, follow Inside the Black and Gold on Twitter. Follow the podcast at YoungTerp1 on Twitter. And we'll have all that stuff coming for you guys as Coach Locks enters what possibly could be his best year, what should be his best year. And we're going to talk about the unit that will probably define that being the Terps offense.
Yeah, definitely a lot to like on the offense. Definitely some question marks as well. Talia Tagovailoa returns for year 4 with the program. Obviously, Maryland returns the entire running back room led by Roman Hemby once again. And then the wide receiver room, a lot of turnover, but definitely a lot to like. Some new pieces, some emerging pieces, and then, some new pieces out of the portal. So it will definitely be interesting. But like you said, I think there's reason why even with a lot of the turnover and a lot of the talent replacing that talent, there's a lot of confidence that year 5 could still be a very successful season.
Yeah, and I think it should be. And the one thing that we all saw, I think, what Big Ten Network had from their camp that they did with the Terps last week. I think you've seen it on every major site. You've seen it on Inside the Black and Gold. You've heard it from us. What is going to happen with Maryland's offensive line? And some interesting stuff put up by, film review that you had up on the site this week.
Yeah, I think that will be obviously probably the biggest question on both sides of the ball, probably the biggest question mark, just to see how far Maryland can go this year. Obviously, you return DJ Glaze, who started all 13 games last year, has played an awful lot this last 2 seasons. He gives Coach Braswell an experienced tackle. Looks like it'll probably be left tackle, but even now they're still kind of rotating that. Obviously, Gotti Ayedzi, guy from Frostburg State, he'll be the guy starting opposite at the other tackle spot of DJ Glaze. So, guy also had with experience at the D2 level, but was able to kind of get here in the spring. Was kind of able to get situated, make that transition, from a D2 pace to D1 Power 5, and then now he's kind of getting situated. So we'll see. The interior offensive line will also be really interesting. Center, they brought in a guy, Mike Purcell, grad transfer out of Elon, but Eric Harris isn't going down quietly. Just kind of been rotating with Purcell with the ones and twos through spring ball, through the first pass scrimmage. So that still needs to be ironed out. Then you talk about portal additions. Obviously, Corey Bullock, who's another portal addition in that offensive line. I expect him to likely take over that right guard spot, with left guard still kind of the question mark. Amelia Moran is probably the little bit more experienced guy, but you have Kyle Long in there that's pushing as well. Marcus Dumerville is another guy who might be a depth guy, but still finds his way working into the rotation. But Maryland wrapped up their first scrimmage this past weekend, and when asked about it, like Loxley admitted, the O line is not close yet. So definitely the biggest question mark. And if Maryland even continues to, work on different rotations, different combos for week 1 against Towson, wouldn't entirely shock me.
Yeah, I think that's almost a given at this point. I kind of see it with I think DJ Glaze at right tackle is something that I would like to see. You have a guy that's been successful in a spot. Moving from right tackle to left tackle is not as easy as just moving from, it's like writing with your left hand if you're right-handed. It's a guy who's played there. He's been a really, really solid piece of this offensive line there. And when you look at this, you have spots like right tackle or whatever that tackle that's vacated is going to be. That's your question mark on there. Where I really, really don't like where the Terps are at right now is between the tackles at their guard spots. I mean, Emilio Moran is somebody that if you're Coach Locks or Coach Brasswell in that room, you had to be thinking, circle that guy and say, if we're going to be successful this year, this guy's got to step up and finally take that starter role for what Ahmed. I mean, 2-3 years now, we've seen him rotate in, take playing time from Mason Lunsford, get all those opportunities, and never really deliver to solidify that spot of an offensive line with that was a really, really good group at times. Now, Eric Harris or Purcell there, I mean, if you don't have the tackles and you don't have the guards, the center is probably the least of your concern unless you're snapping the ball over the quarterback's head. I'm thinking that we see rotations either throughout the year or at least into week 3, week 4. And I don't really think anybody can say they're that surprised by that.
No, I think I could definitely see that. I mean, week two, obviously Charlotte, that's another a chance for Maryland to kind of, work on some things. Obviously, Charlotte's coming in, a lot of familiarity against Maryland, and I've heard a lot of talk about them, talking their trash going into that week two matchup. But yeah, obviously, I mean, I think Eric Harris, I think Purcell, obviously, where he kind of maybe is, trying to overcome that is, when you talk about the portal guys getting there in the spring, Purcell did not. Purcell, this is his first go around, so kind of getting down that chemistry with Talia. That's something that is a work in progress. You can't really force that. You can't really speed that up. It's all about reps and comfort level, getting that trust over time, getting the repetition, timing, everything down. So, but yeah, you mentioned Amelia Moran, and I think even when Loxley talked about, he talked about defensive line, but it's definitely applicable to the O line because we've seen it the last 2 years, just Maryland's rotations and whatnot to get these guys experience, get these guys a little bit seasoned, so that when they're able to step up into these roles, they're kind of able to answer to the billing. So yeah, I think that's a big reason why obviously Glaze is there, and I think Gotti, I think he can come along, Bullock as well. So I think once obviously they kind of identify these five, it's all about getting the chemistry down between among the five of them. So just a lot to kind of question and whatnot. D line is obviously doing a really good job, just kind of controlling the trenches right now through the practice in scrimmage number one. Definitely. I mean, we talked about it, to open up the segment, but this offensive line is definitely going to be Maryland's number one question mark in terms of success this fall.
Yeah, and one thing that you mentioned that really stuck out to me was talk about the rotation. And last year, I think the rotation in some ways really bothered me for the people that have listened to the show for a long time. The receiver rotation, the offensive line rotation, especially the center, I thought was bizarre last year. I didn't always understand it. Obviously, if one guy's really not playing well, you always, as a coach, are obligated to pull him out. It's not really something you see across the board in college football, the rotation they pulled last year. Maybe it pays off now. If you're looking for 5 guys to work together, I think those 5 guys need to spend a lot of time on the field, especially early in the season, if you want them to progress and come out the right way. That's kind of my last point on it. Get 5 that work together, put them to the test, and frankly, that test might not come until you're playing in East Lansing.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And, I think the Spartans think that's obviously a winnable game, but, Spartans have some pieces where they can definitely present some challenges to Maryland in the trenches. So, yeah, I think even UVA, Maryland won't be complete, rollover or whatnot per se. There's, maybe Towson the game. But yeah, Michigan State will definitely be a tough test. So will be really interesting to watch.
Well, we'll move right off to the side and over to the tight end spot. And that's where the Terps have one guy that, was playing really, in my opinion, for a spot in the NFL. Of course, that's Corey Dyches. And then beyond that, you see, I think the program really building a lot of young guys that are going to get opportunity to play, but somebody's going to have to emerge and really take that second spot. Ahmed, who's looking like they're going to be that guy right now.
Yeah, I think probably going to be Preston Howard. I just think he's a guy just kind of in his second year, just doing a really good job. Obviously, he missed a lot of time freshman year, just kind of with battling that foot injury. But just over the last year, kind of making that transition, from a technique standpoint. Obviously, he was a former tight end before he started out as a quarterback at McDonough, but he obviously just, kind of getting down the college aspect of playing that position, I think has kind of been a really big thing over this last year. But then when you just look at the type of tight ends that Maryland looks at and wants in that offense, Preston Howard fits that exactly. In spring, won the Most Improved Freshman award on the offensive side, with Lionel Whitaker drawing the honors on the defensive side of the ball. So I think Preston Howard, just kind of being a year ahead in the room, I think that kind of gives him that edge right now. And then, but you have another guy like Rico Walker, where he was here in the spring as well. Whether he's going to play offense, the defense side of the ball, it's been offense throughout. Done a really good job. Just kind of that big bodied tight end who, even in his first season, possible that he could potentially help out a little bit in the blocking game, which is where I think that tight end room maybe has the biggest question mark right now. I mean, you talked about Corey Dyches. He's a lethal threat in the passing attack. And when you talk about the deep wide receiver room, got to talk about Dyches because he's going to factor into some of those snaps. Preston Howard, I think he's a guy that fans saw glimpses of in the spring game, but he's another guy where he can kind of be dynamic in the open field in the passing game. Rico Walker is another guy where, he can be that threat in the red zone, but just finding that second blocker. So I think when you couple the blocking tight end void of a true tight end that fits that mold, couple that with the offensive line questions, I think maybe that's kind of combining into Maryland just overall protection issues. From a receiving perspective, obviously for the reasons I just mentioned, Corey Dyches, Preston Howard, Rico Walker, all those guys can factor in, but it's going to be from that blocking perspective in the 3rd and 1s, 3rd and 2s. I talked about whether Maryland can bring in another offensive lineman. You talked about Kyle Long, Amelia Moran, who are vying for that that left guard spot. Do both of them find the field in those short yardage situations? Is that a way that they kind of mitigate that concern? So I think that'll be definitely an interesting storyline. I think they can get away with it those first 3 weeks, though. We'll maybe see glimpses of it, but I just think Maryland's overall talent level against the first 3 opponents, if they do what's expected, they kind of should come out ahead. But you talked about Michigan State. I think they'll be able to kind of give Maryland fans a closer look at that factor.
Yeah, and this is a spot where it's one of those things you highlight on teams that win, is are those big blocking tight ends, or even a guy like Burns, who was on the team last year for Maryland, that played special teams, that was ultra physical, that was really a fullback in an era of football where you don't see guys playing that role. But you look at this roster right now and you could say, oh, if we need a block and we need a tight end, he can put on some pounds to be that guy. Well, he's gone from the program right now. So they lost a lot. They had many options at that spot last year. It was a strength with CJ Dupree and there with Burns and there with the rotation of guys. That you lose a couple guys to the portal and now you have a big question mark. But it's definitely something that you're going to have to find. You look at this team right now across who's your short yardage back. I think between Antoine Littleton, I think Colby McDonald can play in that role, or has done well in that role in scrimmages so far in this camp. You have that guy, but if they're going to get housed, it's 3rd and 1. We suddenly are having to run sprint out plays because you can't handle heat. That closes down your playbook and puts you in a spot where most teams succeed. And suddenly those 3rd and shorts, those 4th and shorts, you're going to be in spots where you have to throw the ball. And that's just not good. If you look at where Leah succeeds, that's not really where he's been able to succeed. So overall, I think you kind of have the mold for where your quarterback is best. And it's not in tight windows, and it's not necessarily when he's moving away from the pocket and doesn't have his feet set.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned the short yardage and whatnot. I've actually heard on 2 occasions, and I heard it again this past weekend, Colby McDonald has actually looked really, really good in those, especially in the red zone on the ground. I've heard he's kind of been the guy. Antoine Littleton sounds like, he's kind of struggled a little bit, and Colby McDonald's taken advantage. So that's been a nice little development to hear out of camp. But yeah, just like you talked about, that just Joey Burns type, just kind of battling injuries through his first couple of years. But when he was on the field, his presence was definitely felt. That first year when CJ Dupree and Joey Burns were there, both of them were in the same goal line package. So I just kind of think losing that size and just kind of with Maryland's identity on the roster this year, I just kind of think that's a underrated concern.
Yeah, look at a spot, and we just started talking about it, so it's a great segue into our next topic, the running back room for this team. And for me, it's the biggest strength on this football team right now is just the depth they have in this spot. Obviously, we're going to see guys, and it kind of brings you back to the Durkin days when they had Ty Johnson, Lolo Harrison. They had that group of players. Jake Funk was in the mix then, and you look at the list of guys they have right now: Hemby, obviously being your bell cow guy, Littleton, McDonald, Ramon Brown, and then I'm pretty sure if you get those four guys on the field enough, there's not going to be enough touches for those four. But past that, obviously, you have the recruiting job that Loxley and company has done just to keep bringing talent into that room.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really big thing. I mean, obviously, I think an underrated aspect about all four of those guys coming back, and they talked about it going into last season, was just the experience from a pass blocking perspective. I think that was something that Kobe McDonald did well at, but Roman Hemby, he's done well, but just getting all those guys back there, and kind of when you talk, I mean, I'm sorry to keep bringing it up, but the protection issues. When you talk about that experience next to Talia in shotgun, I think that definitely helps. But obviously, we know what Hemby's able to do just with that breakaway, that top end speed, where he's able to really flip the field anytime he finds the ball in space. Antoine Littleton has started to add some additional size back while maintaining a little bit of the speed. So whether he can, like we talked about, just remain efficient in the red zone and kind of take on that role as that short yardage back, that remains to be seen. But Kobe McDonald's another guy who's done well in camp in that role, and kind of continues to make it that three-headed monster. And then Ramon Brown, he's been able to battle back from his spring injury, suffered in the second scrimmage of spring ball, missed a spring game. So he's been back out on the field in uniform. So just, like you said, just kind of factoring in all those four. But I just think Maryland has the talent at receiver. And I think that the type of receivers that they have, they can beat you over the middle. They can beat you over the top. They can beat you outside. Like, I think that this receiver room has enough complementary pieces where, at really any given moment, there's about 7, 8 guys who can probably make a big play for you. But that running back room, whether they can kind of create that balanced offense, and whether, they can become a more a bigger factor in the passing game. I think Colby McDonald, I think he was a guy that was able to show that out of high school. We've seen it a little bit from Roman Hemby over the last 2 years. So even, Loxie even talked about it as well. What he wanted to see from Hemby was those one-on-one plays in space, making his defenders miss. And that would help, maybe turn some of those 10, 15-yard gains into 30, 35 to just, the big momentum plays on offense. That's what, Loxie talked about, created the big plays on offense, limit them on defense, obviously. So I think Hemby being able to do that, I think if he's able to do that, leading the room again, I think that gives him a chance to be very likely a day 2 selection next year, maybe, high day 3 guy, round 4. And then B, it gives Maryland a chance to create that balanced offense that Maryland fans have been looking for quite some time now.
Yeah, the guy that I circle on this list is Colby McDonald. You talked about having a three-headed monster. I think that's what this team needs. And I also think they have at that point, you have your balanced guy, which is Hemby. You have a guy who I really hope to be a true power runner. I know that they've kind of been struggling in some of those short yardage packages with Antoine Littleton, but a guy that can break tackles, whether they're down the field. Maybe he's not the best 3rd-and-1 back, even though he might look like it. That isn't just a certain run style you need. And then Kobe McDonald, which I think is a balanced guy who has speed on the outside, who I really, really thought was underused at times last year. I think they had a lot of talent back there and they wanted to rotate guys through. But I really look at Kobe McDonald as saying he can do it all. He's going to get that opportunity, whether it's this year or it's next year at Maryland. I think that if he can be successful, it's just another sign the team as a whole is successful. Now, it's also a spot where I look at, and I'll bring up the same thing that I said earlier with the offensive line. If a guy is running for a ton of yards and is running really, really well throughout a game, I know that everybody wants to get on the field, and I know that a lot of guys are battling the transfer portal constantly now as a coach in football. But I would like to see a guy, if he could take 20 carries and he's going for 200 yards in that game and he's got that hot hand, leave him in the game and let him be that guy. I think that's something where you might have saw some overthinking on the offensive side of the ball. And I'm not saying, you can't bring in a guy for 3rd down who you want to run a screen to and have him catch a pass out in space and make a play. I'm not saying eliminate playing time as a whole. I'm saying if we got a guy that's being a great 1st, 2nd down back or a great 2nd, 3rd down back, let them be that guy. And I think hopefully we get to that spot with Hemby being an all Big Ten player from last year, being, recognized all over the place preseason this year. Hopefully they get to that spot, but my confidence with that's not necessarily high. They do really like to rotate their players.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that in terms of, getting hot and whatnot. Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting. Obviously, there's some ammo. I think I saw top five ranking. I can't remember who did it. Just saw it on Twitter. Top five running backs in the Big Ten, didn't have him be in there. But yet again, some analysts have him as maybe some of the top backs in the for next year's NFL draft. But I just think again, like you said, just kind of being able to balance that out. I think will kind of be a big key. So will be interesting to kind of see how that fares, who ends up stealing those snaps and whatnot. But obviously Colby McDonald, Antoine Littleton, Ramon Brown, I think they do a pretty good job with that.
Yeah, and you're going to start me down a rant that I don't think that anybody wants to hear, which is the preseason rankings, regardless of how valid the source of information is that are out there, might be the most ridiculous thing left in college sports. I mean, the amount of quarterback tier lists that like don't have a guy like Leah, but have a guy like Drew Aller at Penn State, who I understand 5-star player, but when he was on the field last year, he didn't look that good.
Yeah,
Just that stuff that's around, I think it kind of goes with the coaches poll and the AP poll that will be out. Both, I mean, the coaches poll is already out. AP poll is it come out either today or later
I
this
think it came out. Maryland didn't get any votes.
Yeah, it's those sort of things, and they always set the stage. But seeing teams like Oklahoma being involved in those conversations after last year, and finding a lot of the players that are out there that might be freshmen or just coming in that find their way onto those lists, kind of throws them out the window, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely think that's fair. Definitely think that's fair. It's not definitely not the testament or whatnot, but I think I just thought it was kind of interesting. But yeah, I thought
it's always worth bringing up because frankly, it's a lens through the national picture of how that views you, or the conference picture in the conference list and the national pictures for those. And you're still not seeing Maryland clearly has not gotten the respect that I think Maryland fans think should be on the radar for this year. I think that guys like on the Big Ten Network can see that it's coming for Maryland, but from the angle of your PFF ratings and others of that that are out there, Maryland's still not a team that's popping up on the list of, I need to fill out, I need to write this article. Let me go find a player that needs to be included into it. Maryland's just not, they're not there yet.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Moving on through the offense, Ahmed, wide receiver room. You brought it up at the beginning. Spot a lot of turnover here. Some familiar names on top of your depth charts that you have up, but who's popping out right now? Who's making those early season connections with Leah?
Yeah, obviously you have Deshaun Jones. I think he's a guy who's kind of just been the alpha. You've heard it, you've also seen it. If you've been to practice and whatnot, just him kind of taking on that veteran leadership role. Just kind of saw him taking Prather aside, work on his routes, the top of his routes, and just kind of the ability to kind of separate and whatnot. So I think he's a guy. Obviously, Caden Prather, he's a guy. He's kind of been able to show his NFL potential in the spring, and that's continued into the fall. Tyrese Chambers, another guy. I mean, he's factoring into the rotation game as well. So he's going to be a guy that he's played, big volume this fall. Ty Felton, he's another guy. He's making his presence felt. A couple of the young freshmen, Braden Wazowski, Ryan Manning, Josh Richards. Sounds like he's kind of coming along a little bit well through his first, stretch in fall camp. He just joined the program this June. And then, a couple of these guys have kind of had their moments as well. So Octavian Smith is another guy. You think you're going to see him a lot. It kind of flashed that first week. Sounded like when Pads first came on, makes a big play. So you talked about Leon Houghton as well. He had a really good first scrimmage as well. When you talk about that Demas type body, that was kind of what you were looking at him at a high school. And I think the biggest question that you had about Leon Houghton, kind of coming out of high school, is when you look at his build, his frame, you say, hey, is he a receiver or tight end? But he's really been able to prove that he's that big bodied receiver, that outside threat that Dante Demas provided, kind of pre-injury. So don't think Houghton will start just yet, but definitely wouldn't be shocked to see him pretty heavily in the rotation as well.
Yes, some guys that I think really, again, the Terps are going to need this year is Shalik Knotts is the first one that sticks out to a guy who had some opportunities, really got over the top of a couple of defenses, but just didn't catch the ball last year. I think that's something that you have to circle nonstop with this group is who's my vertical threat down the field. I think Deshaun Jones is a great mid-range wide receiver. He's going to make those big plays for you. Fantastic red zone presence. I mean, if you look at his career at Maryland, that's where he's made those plays, third and shorts in the red zone, being able to catch balls. Other than that one against Ohio State, 2-point conversion. I know somebody was going to drop that in the comments, so I just had to take it from you now. Those are the plays that he's always been able to provide to this team. Now, you had guys that were lucky enough to get on the field, Octavian Smith being one that, was kind of the constant in there. They now get to see, what it took to be a big time producer in this conference. Now, multiple guys on that team that are on NFL training camp rosters, they get to take a look at what that work was and now try and, replicate it themselves. I would love to see an alpha dog. I know that's something I've been saying as we've gone through each of these position groups. Who's going to come out and be their 1,000-yard receiver this year? That's the thing. Hopefully, don't end up in the spot again last year where they were trying to spread the ball around, trying to emphasize different players. Again, a little bit of overthinking, in my opinion, but who can provide that every day? Kind of like what Dante Demas was before his injury. Don't have to be quite that good, but they need that presence.
Yeah. I think that's definitely fair. I think, Prather's probably the first guy that comes to mind when you talk about that. I just kind of think with his size and coming in with 2 years of experience in West Virginia, definitely expect him to be one of those first 3, 4 wide receivers when the offense first takes the field for that first series against Towson. So I think he'll be a guy where he's able to make those big plays, red zone threat. And then like I said, Leon Hodden again. I think he's a guy that. Yeah, he can kind of take advantage of those big plays down the field. A little bit different of a type of receiver than Shalik Knott is, but I think Shalik Knott, like you said, he showed the ability to maybe kind of take advantage of being under scouted or maybe undervalued by opposing defenses. Where when he got onto the field, he was able to find find some pretty open space, but I think he'd love to have a couple of those passes back. But yeah, will be really interesting to see. I do think that Shalik and Octavian might just be a little bit ahead of, excuse me, Leon and Octavian might be a little bit ahead of the Shalik Knots right now in terms of reps, depth chart, or whatnot. But like you said, I still think even with last year and all the NFL hype and whatnot, and I think last year's receiver room was definitely talented, but I think this wide receivers room could, in terms of production, probably be as good, if not more, or better than last year's room.
Yeah, and I think last year's room, has its big praise of what they had, but when you look at the stats at the end of the year, it was I don't think you can find a Maryland fan or coach that would say that they met or exceeded expectations. I think a lot of people will circle a couple just passes throughout the years, drop touchdowns from different players, missed opportunities when there was big separation, especially down the middle of the field from Leah, and you can just go almost game by game and kind of come up with, I think, what a lot of the fear in the fan base is right now for the offensive line, which is, did they ever really gel together and play off of each other's strengths? And I think if you turn on the tape, you'll find the answer to that really to be no. And that's why you hope to say, I have an alpha dog wide receiver. I have somebody that I can rely on every game that's going to show up, and then keep the rotation tight. Whoever's playing well, again, same thing as I said for the running back room, find ways to get them the ball in space. And just, if somebody's hot, keep them on the field.
Yeah, exactly that. I think, like you said, just being able to find that alpha. I think Deshaun Jones will kind of probably take on that role. But yeah, I think there's definitely a chance to kind of feed the hot hand. Maybe Tyrese Chambers kind of takes advantage of that maybe 1 week or two. But yeah, I just think that this wide receiver room, a lot of these guys, offer different skill sets, whatnot, but definitely explosive when they can get the ball in their hands.
And then the guy that puts it all together, of course, Maryland's quarterback, Talia Tungavailoa, comes back. And he's got a great cast around him other than maybe his offensive line. Where have you been seeing the progressions with Leah? Where do you think he needs to improve and what's kind of the internal feel on him?
Yeah, I just think, just the red zone efficiency. Obviously, I think that's kind of the biggest thing, being efficient with the deep ball, not falling in love with it, not, you know, feeling like you're reaching, chasing. I think maybe those are kind of the things that you kind of want to focus on. And then you think about, the offensive line, Leah, he definitely can, I mean, he can make the plays with his legs, use that mobility to extend the plays a little bit. You just wonder, you hope and emphasize, obviously, that when he's able to get out the perimeter, that he's staying efficient with the ball. I think that's going to be a really big thing, just kind of with that offensive line. Just with Leah being smart with the ball, I think we kind of saw strides from 2021 to 2022 with that. And I think that's going to, again, be a big emphasis this season, just being smart with his decision making. I think Maryland's offense, obviously, what they would have loved to do is been more explosive and have those deep shots and connect on a lot more of those last year. So I think you're going to try and see a little bit more of that. And I think Talia was even a little bit more transparent about that. But like you said, I think, just with the rapport, obviously, he has with some of these veteran guys that came back, Ty Felton, Deshaun Jones, and then Caden, Prather, Tyrese Chambers, both of those guys out of the portal. I think all of those guys, from a chemistry standpoint, did a really good job. And Billy Edwards, Cam Edge, all those guys were very proactive, just kind of throughout the off season, spring ball, through summer, just getting to Jones Hill House, getting in extra work, things like that. So I think we'll definitely be a byproduct of just kind of the testament and kind of the receiver room's mindset and whatnot, and just kind of the relationship with Talia. But I think just kind of in terms of next up with Talia, just staying smart with the football and yeah, not forcing it. I think that's going to be a really big thing.
Yeah, and I'll kind of just tag off of that and just say it's trusting the playbook. Those first reads on quick read plays, you got to put the ball in those windows, whether they're tight or not. Obviously, you talk about being careful with the football, and there is a fine line with that, especially again if they get into those situations where they're going to have to pass the ball in, I would say, third and short situations. You're going to be looking for a lot of quick stuff, getting guys the ball in their hands in space and allowing them to make a move. There's a lot of just like the little things. I think a lot of your big things were accomplished when you look at a player like Leah. Now it's really making that true jump of going from a very, very good college player to a great college player to an NFL quarterback. And I think when you look at his game and his goals, those are the things that you would hope that he's focused on. Obviously, there's been a change in the staff around him. There's going to probably be a little bit of a different approach, but it is still Loxley's offense, guys that know that. I really think it's time to put it all together for Leah and then really find his rhythm in the season, find his rhythm with his receivers that he's been with here for multiple years and have those opportunities to build with. There's a lot that obviously comes from the portal with every college team at this point, but he's in that position where you almost feel like he's had guys around him. He's been in this environment for now a long time in terms of college football players. Can he really make that next step? Can he really show the Big Ten and show college football as a whole that he's not like your weeks 1 through 3 all-star and then kind of dwindles out throughout the season? Can he really show the Big Ten that, hey, this guy is a player that deserves that player of the year, that deserves to be all Big Ten, that deserves a lot of the accolades that he's gotten from the Maryland fans? Does he earn that respect from the conference? And that's really what's on the line from him, at least in my opinion, this year.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, yeah, just with his, maturity and whatnot, just kind of being able to shoulder that. And then, Loxley talked about last year, just the emotional maturity, the development aspect of Talia's game. And, when you think this year, I think that the biggest question maybe I have really is just going to end up being, when Maryland plays these big dogs and they get into the heart of Big Ten schedule against some of these top defenses in the conference. Last year we watched some of these teams. Penn State did a really good job just kind of overloading Maryland's weak spots, flustering the offense, flustering Talia. I mean, the offense just looked completely out of rhythm first 4 series, and you can kind of start to see Talia, start to, his confidence, it's evident just watching the game. It's not the same feel. And you kind of wonder if maybe that's the thing that he can kind of do or needs to do this year, obviously with a lot of the question marks up front. So I think that's another thing that I'm kind of looking at. But obviously he's rewritten the record book here at Maryland. I don't even know if it's a question anymore if he's the greatest quarterback in program history, but I think he'll kind of have that chance to solidify that this season. Obviously, like we talked about, just kind of with the wide receiver room at his disposal. So definitely a lot of momentum with what Talia has to offer this year.
Yeah, and I think the unit as a whole has a chance to kind of be that on the edge year last year, if you want to put it that way. They had a lot of talent. They had a lot of people looking at them and saying, this team's a team that can really make a jump, and it didn't come all the way together for them. They had obviously the opportunities in Michigan, Ohio State, and College Park, but then they also had games like the Wisconsin one, which was just awful, Penn State one, which we just talked about, where they got out of rhythm and just could not fight their way out of it in bad weather, and it just looked like it really mentally challenged everybody on the field, and they didn't rise up to it that day. Now, do you take that and a lot of the guys that are returning, and can you really make progress on it? And that's one of the things that as a coach defines you and as a player defines you is, you get big opportunities, you don't convert on them. Do you come back the next year, your next opportunity, and do you cash in on them, or do you kind of stay in that 7-5? And I even think you could throw an 8-4 in that kind of realm of could have, would have, should have for Maryland. Is you read the schedule, there's 9 wins that you can come up with there. And then if they win a game they shouldn't, you're in that double digit win category. Can you make that happen? I think for this unit, you got to be focused on that. And you got to be focused on what your goals are. And you hear Loxley talk about every video they put out, every press conference he has now. He wants a team that can win championships. He's certainly got guys that got close last year. It's can they finish? Can they show up every week? And can they really reach their goals that they have as a team?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the biggest question mark. Will be really interesting to watch to see kind of how that develops this season. Obviously, Marin will try and get. I think I've seen a lot of people, to have 8 wins. Think a lot of preseason previews that I've seen now. So I think it'll be interesting if Maryland's kind of able to put that together. Do they get to the 8 wins, or are they able to surpass that? So it'll be interesting to watch.
So I'll ask you one that's kind of off the notes. Confidence 1 out of 10 in this offensive unit. Where do you kind of sit right now, and what are your expectations for the year?
Um, I'd say 5 right now because I just think the offensive line is just too much of a work in progress. I think it's really hard to really move the needle until they're able to, kind of prove it in the trenches. Obviously, you hear some good things. I think, Corey Bullock, I think you're able to kind of rely on him. I think DJ Glaze, what you have with him. Gotti, Yedzi, I think he had NFL draft buzz. Can it translate on a consistent basis? We'll see. But I think once the offensive line maybe is kind of able to gel together and able to kind of put some good things together, yeah, that number could probably rise to 6, 7. But until then, I think it just kind of cautiously optimistic right now. And again, I feel tend to stay on 10 toes down on the fact that they have the skill players, they have the running back room, they have the quarterback that you can go into a Big Ten game and you can win. But it all starts in the trenches in the Big Ten. And Maryland, they were able to go into the portal and add some guys. Obviously, a guy like Marcus Dumerville, who I expect to be able to kind of contribute down the line. And yeah, he's been able to rotate in now. But do they have the line and do they have the fives chemistry down in order to go into October, November, in order to move the needle? I think that's kind of the thing that not sure we have the answer to yet. So I think until we do, I'll say right down the middle.
Yeah, I would say I'm probably at a 6. I think I'm a little bit more optimistic on the offensive line, what the skill position players can do for them. I really, when I look at the roster, I like a lot of the guys they have on there, and I will say I kind of like some of the longer term pieces they have that may not be your top line, your depth chart, but guys like Kyle Long that have been with the program, guys like Chris Love that have stuck around for a while. You look at teams that build around the Big Ten, and they might take guys that aren't the highest star ratings, and they end up on the field somehow. For Maryland, that seems like more of a hole that they would fall into than being on the upside of it. But I do see the year over year depth there, and when you look at this group, you end up saying maybe like 2 out of 5 guys right now you're confident in, maybe 3 out of 5 on a good day. But if you have 2 question marks on that line, you really got to think about it. That's an entire side if it's your left guard and left tackle, and it's an entire piece of your interior line if it's your center and one of your guards. That's not necessarily a good place to be, and that's going to stop them in those big games and against teams that I think a lot of people have written off as wins or as competitive games around, like Illinois. And if you look at a Brett Bielema coach team, Wisconsin, Illinois, it didn't happen for them down in Arkansas. But where are they good? In the trenches. Where do they beat you? 17-13, where they run the ball for 200 yards and they hold the ball the entire game. And you look at Maryland's roster on the offensive side and where they've been successful, it's high scoring games where it's up and down and they're in rhythm and they're in pace. So I think that's where you're going to have to win. You're going to have to line up against somebody in a low scoring game and punch them in the mouth. And can this team do it? That's, your 4 or 5 points worth of confidence on a confidence scale.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think, it'll kind of be, yeah, I think that, the concerns are definitely shared there. So I think, like you said, I think the schedule kind of gives them a chance to kind of maybe ease into it and kind of find their groove a little bit. So, yeah, definitely, some experience, and Loxy talked about that, just experience doesn't have to be at Maryland per se, but a lot of these guys, it's not their first time playing football, whether elsewhere or just rotating in, or like DJ Glaze, obviously, who's able to be an integral starter and integral piece in the rotation over those last 2 years. So, but it will definitely be interesting. I think for that first week is 3:30 p.m. kickoff, and will be definitely interesting to see how Josh Gaddis is able to do in his first season in College Park.
Yeah, and we'll have more on the season as camp rolls on. Ahmed, you'll be out there. Is that Wednesday or Thursday this week that's available to the media?
Wednesday, yeah.
Ahmed will be out there. We'll have coverage and notes from practice live in College Park, Coach Loxley. And as they get things going, all that will be available on Inside the Black and Gold. And of course, you can follow us on the podcast. We're going to be weekly up until the season starts. And then, as Ahmed mentioned earlier, we'll have a midweek preview. Probably start off with a season preview because I'm not sure, how much there really is about there for Towson. They're kind of in a transition period in Baltimore now as they move on from longtime coach Rob Ambrose into a new era for the Tigers. And then we'll have post-game coverage after each game here on the podcast. Make sure to like, rate, review, and follow us everywhere that you get your podcast. It really helps us out. And as always, thanks for listening.